Hello, and thank you for attending today's virtual panel, How Leading Companies Support Remote Work and Digital Experience. Before we dive into today's presentation, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. If you have a question at any point during the event, please submit it in the Q&A icon located at the bottom of your Zoom window. We will address your questions throughout the conversation and at the end of the presentation. Also, the recorded version of today's event will be available following the presentation. Please look for an email from the Kentik team to rewatch and share it. Now, I would like to introduce you to today's moderator, Avi Freedman, co-founder and CEO of Kentik.
Hi, everybody, and thanks for joining this panel. The topic today we're going to talk about is how the digital world, the infrastructure and the applications that we all use are scaling to support the unprecedented growth and change in traffic and usage patterns and work patterns that we've been seeing. We're going to cover both how the infrastructure is scaling and also talk about how some of the leading organizations are scaling, how they work to support what's going on right now. The genesis of this was most of us on this panel come from a networking background, but I've been seeing a lot of interest in the general public as well as the networking professionals about what's going on behind the scenes and how the services that we all rely on are supporting that. So I'm going to ask the panelists to introduce themselves briefly, and then we'll get to some of the questions. And feel free to submit Q&A, and we'll either work it in or we'll probably have some time at the end for further questions. Alex?
Yeah, hi, everybody. Alex Guerrero, I'm here in San Jose, California, and I'm the Senior Manager of SaaS Operations at Zoom. And I'm in charge of all of our customer-facing infrastructure, so global network, data centers, and all of the services that make this magic we call Zoom.
Bill?
Great, so I'm Bill Long. I'm in charge of product management at Equinix. For folks who don't know Equinix, we operate 200 data centers around the world that actually house the physical place where a lot of the networks, content providers, cloud providers actually interconnect to make a lot of the core internet work. So we have sort of unique insights and sort of catbird seat into how things are performing at the sort of the core of the internet.
Awesome. Dave?
Sorry, excuse me. I'm Dave Temkin. I'm Vice President of Network and Systems Infrastructure at Netflix. My team is responsible ultimately for how and where we deploy infrastructure around the world for content delivery, as well as our studio and corporate networks, systems, and storage.
Thanks. And Dimitri?
Hey, my name is Dimitri. I'm a Senior Director here at Dropbox. I'm running technical infrastructure at Dropbox, responsible for all the data centers, networking, edge networking, traffic, some reliability, and performance here at Dropbox. And I'm in Los Gatos, California.
Awesome. So thanks again to the panelists for joining. I thought we'd organize from layer up, and we can call the organization layer sort of layer 8, or you can debate where that is on the layer stack. But start with talking about the networking infrastructure, and then move to talk a little bit about the thing in the middle, the data center and cloud supporting infrastructure and how we're using that. And then last, the apps and how the infrastructure teams are supporting those folks. And similarly, I thought we could do just a brief intro to, if you had to describe your overall networking and app supporting infrastructure at a high level, ask each of the panelists to take that. Alex?
Yeah, so our infrastructure is, we've been architecting it for many years, and we want it to be extremely scalable, especially in situations like we're dealing with right now. So we have, automation in place so that we can quickly scale our infrastructure, the network, as well as the compute infrastructure, with very little human intervention. There's got to be some, of course, at some point, but the infrastructure is there in place, and we're paranoid, so we're, so we have plenty of resources already in place for a huge spike. But we also want to, if we surpass that threshold, we want to be able to quickly scale, so we have automation in place to be able to do that.
Awesome. And Bill, you guys run the physical infrastructure, and then you also have some systems that enable you guys to coordinate and even run exchanges that move bits yourself, right?
Yeah, so what we're seeing sort of around the world, and there's a fair bit of volatility between different markets. So we operate internet exchanges around the world, and we've seen traffic increases using sort of December of last year as the starting point, increases ranging from 10% to over 40% of traffic increases. Good news is that all that core infrastructure is actually scaling really well. This sort of influx of traffic happened at a sort of fortuitous time in the technology upgrade cycle, where we're really about 2 to maybe 3 years into upgrading from 10 gig to 100 gig capacity. So luckily there was a lot of extra headroom left in core capacity that we're seeing. A lot of that headroom fill up, but we're not seeing a lot of these internet exchange ports start to hit peak threshold. So great news that the capacity is there. We have also seen in a lot of locations, specific to applications where collaboration and unified communications, where people are very quickly tacking up multiple 100 gig connections between that. So the ability at the core of the internet to be able to scale up in a matter of days for multi 100 gig links, it really is and I think Alex was talking about the automation, the combination of physical infrastructure being able to scale, a bunch of headroom, and then a bunch of automation has made it such that really we're able to absorb a lot of these, industry-wide, this big scale and volume actually pretty well.
Cool. And Dave, you guys run, as you mentioned, you run your studio network, you have an edge network, you also have infrastructure that's more core. How would you sort of give an overview of how people should think about Netflix's architecture?
So Netflix, traditionally, as many people know, has operated in AWS for nearly a decade now for a large portion of their infrastructure. But for about 7 years now, we've operated our own content delivery network. We've had a global product for Netflix for about 4 years now, and from day one for that global product, we operated that 100% within our own infrastructure. And today, our content delivery is 100% from our own infrastructure globally. The studio and the kind of the rest of it is a mishmash of a bunch of different technologies. And so some of that is operated within our own infrastructure, some of that is operated within AWS. Right now, it's not unique to us. Most content production is shut down around the globe. And so there's not a lot going on in that space, but one of the big challenges we are trying to figure out is what parts of it can we restart? Things like post-processing, visual effects, animation, things that traditionally people have not done from home because they require a significant amount of compute power and a significant amount of bandwidth to move raw encodes around. We're undergoing efforts to figure out how can we get that operating out of people's houses. And we've seen some early success in that space. And then on the content delivery side, obviously, to Bill's point, the internet itself seems to be scaling pretty well. And, you use the internet as a pretty nebulous term to talk about a lot of different things. But by and large, we've made some changes, as we've talked about publicly, to try to ease some of that pressure. But by and large, we're seeing that things are holding up quite well.
Awesome. And because you brought it up and it's a question we've had in the Q&A, is some of those changes, we can talk about a little more later, but is that more sort of interconnection focused or more broadband edge access focused? What's the larger concern to try to protect?
There's no one size fits all here. Frankly, we've put ourselves, the internet is, as I said, is a lot of different things in this case. And in some cases, interconnect is strained, and in other cases, it's last mile. We're seeing generally last mile is performing okay, last and middle mile. I'm hearing of contention in some cases, especially on DOCSIS networks, more with upstream than with downstream. Just given that they weren't built for use cases like 250 of us being in a Zoom meeting, and your neighbors also being in Zoom meetings at the same time. But we're seeing it across both, but we're also seeing is that generally nothing is absolutely melting down. It is scaling quite well, both our system and other people's systems. And we've tended to build these things. ISPs have, to degrade in such a manner that the services are still quite usable by users around the world.
Awesome. That makes sense. And it's helpful context as we see some of these things that we do at the underlying layer start to make the news, given people's curiosity and how critical it's become. And Dimitri, you talk a little bit about your network architecture.
Oh yeah, so Dropbox is historically running their own data centers, where we moved out of AWS in terms of storage like 5 years ago. We did this base jump. We are so far happy with that. So we operate our own data centers in US, Europe, Asia Pac, and Sydney. We also operate our own edge network, which consists of like 25, 30 nodes globally in the markets where our customers are present. So we operate around, we probably process around like multiple terabits of data at any given point of second, I would say, on a transit, on a backbone side, it's even more. So we operate our own backbone again, the connectivity between edge and our data centers, data center to data center. Also, we are in the group of companies who operates on like hybrid scale. So we don't do everything ourselves. We do most of ourselves. Core stuff is definitely in our data centers, but we utilize public cloud where we feel this is right business decision. We are not in the position where we'll implement everything for us. So we are successfully utilizing Amazon for many cases where we don't feel it is our core competency, or we don't feel we want to hire 500 engineers to build something that is already available on Amazon and we can solve it with money. So yeah, the challenges on networking that we sort of oversee right now in this situation, the scaling works fine. As everyone mentioned, scaling is fine. The thing that is like probably slowing down a little bit operations of networking across the globe, and how different sort of vendors where we present in terms of data centers and pods and so on and so forth, like a restriction access. So that can make it slow down a little bit, but other than that, those are the right measures and we feel good about it. So.
Cool. And so, as Bill started talking about and Dave brought up, the internet isn't one set of tubes. It isn't, the backbone like we used to have in the 90s. It's a bunch of networks that connect to each other. They each run their own network, and then there are these interconnections. And so, the last few years have had a lot of richness of options, ranging from the tried and true, I run a circuit, or I run a fiber, or the exchange points that a lot of us have been active in have been around for decades, even cloud exchanges and fabrics, and even remote peering options where someone can say, hey, I want to connect to, I'm having a lot of traffic to Zoom, connect to a provider, and then if Zoom accepts, make that. Over the last month, have you been thinking about how you use those combination of ways of connecting your networks to others, in any different ways? We can go different order. I'll pick on you, Alex.
Yeah, I've actually have been thinking about this a lot the last few weeks, and basically, we're looking at where most of our traffic is coming from, and we're actually using your tool to a large extent to do that. And
thank you. I did not tell you to say that.
Yep. And determining, if we need to peer with some new partners, or if we need to order more transit, we're also using Cloud Exchange. We use Bill's Cloud Exchange quite a bit, actually, and to increase bandwidth across the board. Basically, at this point, it's just kind of go for it. Get as much bandwidth as you can.
But you would say,
but I'm thinking of strategies for the long term as well.
You would say it's similar to the way that you had been operating, just sort of continue to do analytics and figure out what are the best ways to connect to the other networks? No major changes as a result of.
Yeah, I mean, we want to be close. We want to be as close to the eyeballs as possible. I mean, our product can handle a lot of latency, but we do. But still, I mean, just you're gonna, if the closer you all are to the eyeballs, the better performance you're gonna get across the board. So there's that's mainly what I'm looking at is bandwidth and being as close to the customer as possible. But and I think speed is and I don't mean speed, bandwidth speed. I mean how delivery speed of the service is very important. So using something like Cloud Exchange, or we have a lot of good relationships with a lot of our carrier partners around the globe, and you know, we tend to call the ones who are going to deliver more quickly first, especially in a situation like this. But luckily, we were kind of ahead of the curve, as we had probably 50% more capacity than we needed at our maximum usage to begin with. So and we kind of keep that, try and keep that in place, you know, all the time.
Awesome.
And we're, you know, the last couple of weeks we've been kind of all hands on deck to keep that standard.
Thanks. And Dave, you guys have been, you know, a user or supporter of exchange points. You've had a model where you also can drop servers in where they need to be. In terms of the operational model that you've had over the last few years, have you had really any changes with all this scaling at the infrastructure layer, or have all the pieces been using them similarly or somewhat differently?
Mostly similarly. You know, we have had multiple fires at this point with our supply chain, which is trying to figure out how and where we're going to get servers to deploy into ISP networks. We actually, just to, you know, put that out there, we've resolved all of them at this point. We're fairly comfortable with our supply chain. But as an example, our primary server manufacturer is located in Santa Clara County in California. And so they got the shelter in place order and, you know, had 24 hours to figure out how to get as many of the boxes out of there as we possibly could. We've resolved that by moving some of that manufacturing elsewhere and also some other means. But by and large, we've been able to use most of the infrastructure we've deployed. Partners like Equinix have been great in getting cross-connects provisioned quickly where we need them in order to get interconnect beefed up in certain markets. You know, we are operating in a very uncertain time. And one of the things that I've told my team, frankly, is that this is, you know, I don't look at this as a race. I don't even look at this as like a power walk. We really don't know how long we're going to be in this mode for. And so I want to ensure that our customers have a great quality of service, but I also want to make sure that my teams feel supported and that they feel like, and I'm sorry, this is getting a little off technical track here, but
no, we were going to talk about this at the end. So
okay, well, I can save it. I can save it then if you want me to save it.
Yeah, why don't you save it, because
Cool.
You know, it's in the title, and it's something we think a lot about also. But I think we're all trying to figure out how to best support our people, because if we don't support our people, then, you know, the services aren't going to be there either. And so, Bill, you've got a big cross section of how people are using the different array of services that you have, from the, you know, the fiber to the more managed services. Are you seeing any difference in patterns of consumption over the last month?
Yeah, a couple different ones. You know, Alex hit on a couple great, you know, we're seeing a big uptick on people wanting to use Cloud Exchange or a private way to connect into some of the collaboration and unified communications tools, you know, across all of them. And the ability, I mean, Dave hit on it as well, to have those guys be able to scale being a cross-connected way. So when you want to stand up multiple hundred gigs of traffic, if you're trying to do that over a network, that can take a long time. But if you can do that with just being a fiber cross-connect, run a data center, you can run a piece of fiber from, you know, the Comcast network over to the Netflix network or the Zoom network. That has proven to be, we've had a couple examples where your prospective customers or weren't in one of our locations where they could be a cross-connect way, and that did cause some problems. So being physically proximate gives you a lot more of that sort of ability to quickly scale, as Dave was hitting on. We are seeing cloud exchange increase. We're seeing a lot of acceleration of use cases that were already started, but it seems like what we were expecting to take 2 years is now taking 2 weeks or 2 months. So things like VPN aggregation for work at home types of folks, we're seeing lots of that acceleration. We actually launched a new virtualized router and firewall solution to allow people to do that last year. And we've seen a good uptick in the adoption of that product to help people sort of be in more locations more quickly, to be able to accommodate some of these new traffic flows that they weren't expecting to see this quickly. So I think in general, a lot of that applies also for people doing peering, where they might have been sort of the beginning of the peering curve using just basic transit service. They very quickly have jumped on the internet exchanges and even doing private peering over PNI. So basically taking what had been taking 1 to 2 years of sort of maturity is now happening in months.
So it's interesting because I was going for a walk, practicing safe social distancing around San Francisco this weekend, and you walk past the Amazon Go, and 6 months ago it was like, yeah, I guess that's sort of interesting, and then you're like, wow, that's actually, and all over the place we're seeing some things which were, it's a stressful, horrible situation, but there's some things that we can see that were sort of visionary that may come into it. And I guess you talked a little bit about this, Bill, and to move on to the next topic, and I'll start with Dimitri. Your customers and users are now shifting patterns. So you might have had people that were at work that are now at home, but there's a tremendous number of companies who have, I'll call it checklist security architecture, where you've got all the packets coming back through centralized infrastructure, where peering or even split tunnel, where the packets go out from someone's home to the internet, might be new. And I'm wondering, for those that are running services, and Bill, you just touched on this in terms of some of how you're the other side of it, the corporate customers, but we'll start with Dimitri. But are there any issues you're seeing in terms of architecting how customers are accessing your services?
No, mostly we don't have those issues, and those type of things are built in our product already. So we don't see any problems. We don't build anything new, because it doesn't. We don't need to build anything new. So we have a desktop client where we have like a lot of security. We have like all of the encryption keys and so on and so forth. So it doesn't really matter what is in the middle. So no one will ever be able to touch the data and analyze it. So as you rightly mentioned, a lot of companies are like switching into working from home mode, and they are like increasing demand on using different services, like Netflix, YouTube, like including Dropbox as well. And there will be different patterns where we used to have, let's say, a lot of traffic coming, let's say, from one university, from like 1,000 accounts, and now we'll see a lot of traffic coming from 1,000 different places, from many different networks, from the same people. And this is where we're looking at and analyzing our like last mile connectivity and so on and so forth. This is where we're actively investing in peering with a lot of local providers, because back in the days we could have peered with let's say university, with MIT somewhere, and with their infrastructure. But now all of those people are distributed across university, or even travel to their parents as well. So we need to do a better job with like last mile telecom providers that we're doing actively, and try to peer and find solutions how to route traffic directly. So Dropbox is a very heavy peering company. So we probably process more than 50% of our traffic over peering these days. And this is one of the things that we're actively investing. So, yeah. Have
you seen an uptick in companies, traditional enterprise that run their own networks, looking to directly connect to you, sort of like the Cloud Connect for Dropbox?
Yes. So this is a hot topic for us. Probably it started last year, I would say. Before that, there were like conversations here and there. Okay, we want to connect to Dropbox in a sort of AWS or like any other public cloud company, like in direct connect way. So, and it's becoming more and more like hot topic these days. So we are looking into how to utilize it. We have multiple solutions. They're not like super easy, I would say, but we have solutions for people to do that. We are utilizing cloud exchanges in the points of presence where we are offering those opportunities as well. So yeah, so we are, yes, there is an uptick in requests, yes.
Cool. Sounds like a good future webinar for people who are, every time there's a new wave of people looking to do interconnection, there's an opportunity for education, which is fun. And Alex, are you seeing any demand for companies to directly connect with you, more than you used to maybe see service providers or other kinds of networks?
Yeah, I mean, there's, especially enterprises, they want to connect directly to us. I can't necessarily see it. I've seen an uptick as of recently, specifically for those requests. I think people are, the internet, if the internet's working fine, then, that there's bigger fish to fry right now. But yeah, I mean, we do, in the past, we did, just a traditional direct connect, just to directly connect to them, whether we needed a circuit between our data center and their data center, however it was going to work. We've moved away from that, and now we're encouraging people to use the cloud exchanges as well as peering exchanges as much as possible. So we're connecting to a lot more peering exchanges around the globe. I mean, we're all every data center we're in, and we're in 19 data centers globally today. We connect to whatever the biggest exchange is in that market. But now we're looking at the second biggest, and maybe the third biggest, to get in on all of them.
Yeah,
so you see the. Go ahead, Dimitri.
If you'll let me know, I want to add about this. The nature of like these direct connect requests, where they're coming from, is for us it's not surprise. It's not about performance or anything else. It's about security. So enterprise companies are in a position when they don't want to see the bytes between, let's say, them and Dropbox to go on the public internet ever. And the number of those requests is continuously increasing, and people are interested in that due to like many reasons: security, a lot of compliances they need to follow. So, yeah.
And do you have SD-WAN companies looking to connect to you directly, or do the enterprise want to have their own sort of management of that?
So it's a mix. Some enterprises are big enough, and then they can just say, okay, you know what? Let's just figure out a solution how we direct connect to each other. Some other companies can say, you know what? There is no good solution. Let's use, I don't know, Equinix Cloud Exchange or any other cloud exchange. Some other companies can say, you know what? We have a trusted man in the middle whom we both trust. Let's just utilize them or something.
Cool. So I thought I'd pop up a little bit of a level to the application supporting infrastructure. We talked a little bit about the interconnection between networks, broadband, and some implications there, the corporate networks. But and then after that, we can talk a little bit about automation. Alex, when you mentioned automation, there were a bunch of people, interested in that. And as a way I think of that as sort of the architecture that we've started going, that people sometimes hear as cloud native, but networking people have been doing, for some time. But just in terms of a bunch of you mentioned hybrid cloud, doing some public cloud, doing some of your own infrastructure. Have you wound up turning up the scaling for the server compute cloud infrastructure that supports the applications in different patterns over the last 1 to 2 months? Now you went last, Dimitri, so I'll pick on you again.
So yeah, if I understand your question correctly, you're asking, were there any like different patterns on how we manage applications or manage like... Or
turning up. Have you used new cloud infrastructure or changed the mix of how much you do public cloud versus your own data centers?
Yeah, so within Dropbox, server fleet into the 3 types, storage, database, and compute. I would say so. As I mentioned before, we are a hybrid cloud company. And we are willing to utilize public cloud where necessary. And it's not a secret, one of the ways how we can potentially utilize public cloud is we use them as an extension to Dropbox. In case, let's say, we're short on capacity, I don't know, we did something wrong with our capacity forecast or something, we'll be able to utilize public cloud and throw that traffic to them for a time being and solve that problem with sort of money versus not being able to serve our users. So we are very far away from that sort of point, but a lot of those capabilities are inbuilt, and this is like a value of being sort of hybrid cloud. You can always utilize public cloud capabilities and public cloud scale for your own like business continuity as well.
Makes sense. Dave?
Sorry,
You're on mute.
working correctly. You know, I can't speak overly authoritatively for our public cloud infrastructure in that there is a whole other team of people that do an awful lot of that all day. What I can say from what I know is that we have proactively scaled up what we expected, you know, what we thought we might expect to need. We've got a great relationship with AWS. We reached out, said, hey, we're going to need some more capacity over and above what our forecast is. Is that a problem? They said no, and we turned up some capacity. You know, at the end of the day, I know there's a question that we'll get to probably later on about, you know, what we've seen from a growth perspective. You know, our cloud infrastructure scales relatively linearly with our subscribers. You know, we've invested an awful lot of time and energy and money into making that, you know, infinitely scalable would be the wrong thing to say. It'd be, you know, that'd just be marketing speak, but quite scalable in such a way that we don't feel like we're stressing our cloud infrastructure by the current events.
Awesome. And Alex, how about Zoom?
Yeah, so we are in a hybrid environment. We use the public cloud as well as our own data centers, and quickly scaling the data centers, you know, considering supply chain issues has been a challenge, but in the public cloud, you know, not so much. And so we're you know, we had automation techniques in place to auto scale in many cases as we need. And I say auto scale, you know, there's I'll just say scripts. You know, we'll use tools like Ansible and Puppet to automate different tasks and get things done without having to manually do everything. So other than having to scale faster than we anticipated, a lot faster, everything's kind of been our standard operating procedure to, you know, I mean, we were prepared to need to scale quickly in an emergency situation, and it was maybe a little bit, well, a lot more than what we expected, but yeah, we're handling it.
So, you know, it's an interesting thing. People think of networking as people typing things into routers and deploying routers, and within the industry, there's a lot of angst about what are the skills changes needed? And there's been a lot of questions, I think, about what do all those software people do, you know, in the corner. And if you guys could give a rough idea of either how many people or sort of percentage of people you have in the networking group that actually work on this kind of automation, you know, and maybe it's a little fuzzy between the application orchestration and the network, but you know, sort of network server, cloud infrastructure, is that a significant percentage of, you know, of your groups? And I'll start with you, Dave.
So my total network team for the global, including business operations stuff and all that other kind of fun stuff, is roughly 80 people. The people working on stuff like automation and deployment, you know, from a soft perspective, i.e. not the physical deployment, is 10 or 12. It's a relatively small team all in all. And then, you know, we've got people who are doing things like interfacing with Bill's teams on well, I don't think they're directly Bill's teams, but Bill's colleagues' teams on things like ordering and provisioning and all that other fun stuff. That's another half dozen or so people. I would say that we run relatively lean, and that'll, again, come back to what we'll talk about later on, I think.
Yep. And Dimitri?
So yeah, our network organization is like, we can divide it in like three parts. It's like network operations, network automation, and like network engineering, like NetEng, as you can call it. So automation is a big part. Even today, when we hire network engineers and network automation people, we require everyone to be able to code, because I feel like there will be, don't get me wrong, there will be no job for pure network engineering people like in 5 years from now. So I am pushing everyone to be able to automate. As many of the networking sort of vendors, as you can imagine, Cisco, Arista, Juniper, they're going into like API sort of heavy business, API first, and so on and so forth. So as a result, automation is heavy at Dropbox on networking. So, and this is probably one of the main things that we are doing with networking today. We rarely touch those devices manually. So most of the things is happening through like, I don't know, CLI tools or tools we build in-house or tools we utilize, including Kentik and so on and so forth. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Thank you for the mention, but I did not pay you for that either. And Alex, you had mentioned this a little bit already. So just popping up the stack a little bit more. Just had a question because some of you, most of you sit adjacent to the teams that are running the operations for these services. I guess, have you, not to go too much into how we're running our companies and supporting our people in this times, but have you had any surprises, any things that surprise you that work well, or but were just different needs as people who run the software, at Dropbox and Zoom, and it makes all these things go? As you support these peer teams, have there been any new patterns, or have things been going, pretty much as you expected? And Alex, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, other than a lot more traffic, I haven't really seen any new patterns. But I did want to mention regarding the automation, especially on the network side. Well, for one thing, we do require that our network engineers know more than Perl today. They need to be able to script in some other language. But yeah, I mean, and I know our manager of network engineering, that you guys are old friends.
Yep.
And he's kept the team pretty lean. I mean, I think we're just about 10 engineers, and and fairly efficient. But I'm going back to the last question because I took notes and I wanted to.
No, that's fine.
But what was the question on the?
Just the question of the team that writes the software, that does the coordination, the software that your network team is supporting. Have there been any things that work really well, or any surprises, or any different kind of ways that you need to support them as you've been scaling the infrastructure and trying to work together across the operational groups?
Yeah. Like I said, I think the spike in traffic, I think there's gonna we'll go back and have the lessons learned. We're still kind of in the middle of this, as everybody knows. So yeah, I don't really have any kind of lessons learned or anything that we've done different. We were prepared for this, and we're managing it how we expected to. And next time we meet, maybe we'll have some cool war stories.
That's fine. And I think that as we look across our SaaS company customers, for the most part, we're compressing 6 months of scaling for some people into weeks, and sometimes you need to let things settle, and then everyone gets used to what's going on. But overall, there's been a tremendous amount of design and architecture work done, which again could be a follow-up for those interested in digging deeper into these kinds of things, that enables this kind of work to do. So it's not people staying up late at night configuring things manually, the architectures. In some cases you get a little bit less efficiency at small scale, but are designed for, sort of exactly this kind of use case. So I had on my list of things, but there's also been a lot of questions. Comment that Dave made pinged some questions, and I forget who it was when I was doing the panel prep that said servers are the new toilet tissue, or server space. Server space is the new toilet tissue. I'm sorry. But I guess there is, how do you think about that given, we're a global economy and we're starting to lock down? As you think about space, power, cloud capacity, servers, and Bill, we haven't picked on you, so I'll pick on you as sort of one side of seeing what people are doing. Are your shipping docks full? Are people starting to reserve ahead? Is there nervousness in your customer base about, growth and capacity?
To be honest, for the data center market, we haven't seen that yet. There's been a lot of sort of inquiries. I think Alex was hitting on that people are scaling much faster than they intended, and we are seeing that where you might have been in 2 locations per continent, and very quickly people are saying, oh, I actually need to be in 4 locations per continent. So it's again an acceleration of architectures that were planned, but just really scaling out faster than what people had sort of otherwise been planning for. But those things are going to take time to play out. To Dave's point, that this is going to be a longer term marathon because we don't know how long it's going to last. So that's sort of the way that we're seeing it.
Cool. Dave, you mentioned, a little bit, as you think about those different dimensions, it sounds like the cloud team's working, with the public clouds. Are you thinking any differently about, the data center space or any specific concerns? People ask to name names, which we won't do, about specific vendors, but.
In general, no. So, in our case, for example, one of the things that we did was we effectively pulled forward our growth plans for what we would have done at the holidays of this year. So like the end of 2020, we pulled into now. And so to your point earlier, like people shouldn't and don't need to necessarily be scrambling. The big what if, or the big kind of question mark though, is to your point, as markets become constrained, both from other people pulling this stuff in without, in the way that you need physicality, right? Whether it's access or more power or things like that, that's certainly the places that we have some concern. The point I was trying to make earlier was that I've asked my team to pursue that wherever they possibly can and to pull things in. But we also recognize there's a lot of other things going on that are potentially more important than Netflix, frankly. And we want to be sympathetic to those causes and allow people who have those immediate needs, whether it's e-learning or whether it's healthcare or anything else like that, or like this Zoom meeting, they have the ability to get the capacity they need so that we don't rush and try to get it all at the same time and put people in an awkward situation. And frankly, I want my team to remain healthy. And I recognize they've got families at home. I'm sure some of you have families behind you in other rooms while you're watching this video conference. And I want them to feel like we're supportive of them and that they have the ability to balance work and life right now, especially given that life is greater, is potentially posing much greater demands than work. And so it's important that we don't scramble everyone to get everything done right now while this is all super fresh for everyone and everyone's just trying to figure out what the new normal is.
No, that makes sense. And I guess go ahead.
No, Dave, I want to sort of hit on that. Equinix operates a physical infrastructure. There are people that have to come into and out of our data centers all the time. And we sort of made the hard decision in Germany, Italy, Spain, and France to actually restrict access into those data centers for those exact reasons of the health and safety of our employees, our customers, but also the long-term sort of viability of these assets, where we just want to make sure that we're taking the strategy that's going to make sure they're the most stable for the longest period of time and introduce, there's enough risk in other parts of the world right now. Let's do everything we can to minimize the risk in where we can control it. So I echo those same sentiments, Dave.
No, that makes sense. And as we're coming up on time, and it's something I think all of us as leaders are thinking about, and I know there's a lot of, there's a lot of questions, about too, but, how are we, I guess that's an interesting question is, a lot of our teams were already virtual. We've moved from some people working from home to, as Dave mentioned, I sort of think of it as work from family. At Kentik, our first all hands meeting when we're all remote, you could see the families, participating off to the side, and then as people get more comfortable, coming in, because it really is different patterns, that we're doing. And while people run these critical infrastructures, as Dave said, they're people. And even though we've talked on a little bit, I'll give everyone a chance to say, sir, what are the things that you're thinking about, and what are some of the things that you've been doing that have worked well, and to try to help support your people and bring everyone together. And I'll start with Alex.
Well, virtual happy hour is awesome. But yeah, I mean, at Zoom, we're all about the remote worker. That being said, the operations team, the network operations team, are for the most part here in San Jose. But we do have some folks, a couple folks remote, but they're in a remote office though, not from home. But I mean, we're all working from home now, so we're practicing what we preach now for sure. So it's I mean, I think I've been hearing a lot of how to be a better remote worker, and kind of practicing those things, like waking up and getting dressed as you would if you went to the office and stuff like that. It's just little tips like that. So and I think a lot of people are going to kind of learn some of these tricks and tips and tricks during this time. And yeah.
And then we've asked our employees to be tolerant and maybe even enjoy when kids come in with pictures and pets, and for the most part, we've been fortunate. Our customers are generally cool that way as well. But as you, Dimitri, you have a bunch of groups, and a bunch of people. How are they trying? How are you trying to support them and them trying to support each other as we get to these new patterns?
I think one advantage, or one very good thing about working remotely, working from home, is everyone is on time on meeting these days. So you go on your VC, everyone is there. You don't need to wait anyone. Everyone is at home. You just click the button, you're there. So other than that, our team, not all of the teams, but some of the teams used to be distributed. We even today have people who work remotely and continue to work remotely, and we are learning from them. So we have we are asking them questions, because a lot of people on the team continue to work remotely, and they've been working remotely for years, and they compile a good list of good practices, what we can utilize. All of it, and we're trying to use all of it. The one key point here is, like Dave mentioned, we're not only working from home, we're working with kids, and let's say my wife works. I have 2 kids. All of them are running somewhere in the next room. So it creates additional challenges. So it's important to keep that in mind. One other piece is maybe some people are missing is how deep our sort of on social interactions. And for many people, going and work from home and go to almost zero social interactions, it's very, very painful. And they require a lot of support. I've seen that in our company. I've seen that in different companies. I see how people struggle. So, and that's important to keep in mind and give them support. Jump on a Zoom, have a conversation, call them. I don't know, do a walk-in one-on-one. When you do it on the phone, not on a Zoom, because you can kill Two things: you can walk and you can still do your one-on-one. In terms of operations and working from home, I feel like I don't see negative signs. Let me put it that way. I see positive signs. People are communicating. People are on Slack, even when we have issues from time to time while working from home. I see a very good, fast response. So, which is important. We track our productivity every single week because we make different decisions within the company on how the next week will look like. We measure productivity, how many active people, how people are productive, we run different metrics to make sure we know the state of the business. It's important to, when everyone is working from home, it's easy to lose the momentum. And you can get into a situation where, I don't know, half of your company is not productive. And you are still trying to push for your deliverables, for your commitments, and so on and so forth. You need to have a clear metric to understand if your company is productive, if your team is productive. If half of your team is not productive and you have 5 people on the team, it means 2 other people will go on call every week. That is
Yep.
not. So try to build the right metric about productivity, about motivation, about involvement of those people, because it's easy to go into the very awkward situation.
And we're not going to have time today to talk about it because we're coming up, but just how do we even recruit, hire, onboard, train? There's a lot we don't know about how long this is going to last, which is, create stress. We're trying to think about even, is there a point at which we make therapists available different ways, happy hour with hats and backgrounds, and we're all trying different patterns. And Bill, I guess Equinix has been a mix. You're so globally distributed, but maybe a little bit less on the corporate side. How is Equinix working to try to support people in these new patterns?
Yeah, so one of the big changes, we do have network operation centers around the world. Those are all now work from home, and it's going great. I mean, I think it's one of these things that, again, I've talked about ideas that have now been accelerated. That's one of them. The question is how long are some of these, how much of these shifts that we're seeing now that actually work pretty well, how many of those are going to stick and become the new normal? And then how many are we going to actually revert to old ways of doing things? Everything from, I've sat online with my kids and they're doing classes and it works pretty well. So I think there's going to be a lot of new patterns that we're all going to adjust to. And it's just going to be interesting to see with what stays with how we've sort of creatively adapted and then what goes back to the way it was.
Yeah, I mean, I was a science fiction fan at a young age, and as were probably many in the community, but I think a lot of the futurism misses what Dimitri and some of the others were talking about, which is, people are people and we evolved a certain way and need interaction. And Alex, thank you. It's been awesome that Zoom has worked so well and enabled, we were using Zoom, already. It was more Zoom Room than Zoom from Sofa for business, but it's adapted. But I think maybe in another few months, we'll be able to comment both about supporting other teams and, about which of these patterns, will be present. And I think it's, it's difficult, and certainly we all cringe when companies are sort of taking advantage of it as a marketing opportunity, but there's real things which hopefully will have some benefit that'll come out of it. But right now, everyone's, just very nervous because there's a lot we don't know. So I do have a last question of mine, but there were some questions from the audience, which I'm not going to push on anyone to answer, but we have a recurring theme, which is that if anyone's comfortable about talking roughly order of magnitude, how much your demand and traffic has scaled over the last, let's say this year. I won't pick on anyone, but if anyone's comfortable with any stats, there's a lot of curiosity about that.
Yeah, I think I already mentioned, depending on market and depending on product, between 10 and 40%.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah, I'm unfortunately in a position where I can't comment too much because it's technically would be material
Nope.
public info.
Yeah.
What I can say is that we are thankful, and I am humbled by the fact that we're a product that people are turning to seek comfort. I had a call with a regulator yesterday who in a European country who literally said to me, in an ideal world, every single one of our citizens would be sitting at home on a couch watching Netflix right now. And, you know, obviously, I don't think that's something that any government official would have said before the current situation. And so we're taking that very seriously. And, you know, we're thinking about how to best support that growth, both, you know, within our own network and within ISP networks.
That makes sense. And as I said, I won't pick on anybody. And, you know, Dave, I think it's a, go ahead, Dimitri.
Yeah, we're usually public on that, but I'm not in a position to talk about it right now because it's, as Dave mentioned, there are a lot of like things to speculate. But what we'll probably do, we'll put a good blog post after that. So about our learnings, about what we did, how we did, what went well, what didn't went well. So because we are very public on our blogs as well. So this is what I can promise, but I'm not in a position to talk about it today. But also, as many of us mentioned, we need to not only focus like on a business, on the people, but also on the goodwill. And every single company have to do it right now and find opportunities how we contribute to a solution here. So yeah, this is where Dropbox and like Zoom, Netflix, and Equinix, I'm pretty sure are positioned as well.
Yep, that's helpful. And there was, Dave, there was a specific question. Again, no pressure to answer, but were you surprised at the level of interest, you know, from regulators? Surprise or any other emotions, you know, when this started happening, you know, over in Europe?
We had already been looking into options before any regulators had reached out to say, hey, how can, you know, if and how can we reduce our footprint? We had certainly been seeing issues in some of the early wave European countries like Italy and Spain, where they had shelter in place or lockdown orders earlier than other places. We were kind of surprised by the content of the reach out, but at the end of the day, I think they just had the best interest of their citizens and their networks in mind. To the point about the regulator that I spoke to yesterday, they just want to ensure that, you know, no regulator wants to be the one, let me just rephrase that, no regulator wants to be the one to tell their citizens that they made the decision to make Netflix stop working during a pandemic when everyone is isolated at home. And so all they are trying to do is just make sure that their country networks are stable. And we said, hey, we feel like we've got a few levers we can pull. Let's pull those levers and let's go with it. You know, originally we were asked to cap everything at SD. That was a little bit of an unnuanced view of how our system works and how our encoding works. And so we came back and we said, hey, we've got ways that we can immediately get a 25% efficiency across the board. Let's do that first and let's come back around and reassess.
Yep, that makes sense. And I think, you know, the internet, it's pretty amazing everything that's going on with our scaling. At the same time, if we turned off television and asked that all to flow over the internet, that would be, you know, yet a different story. But again, that might be a future topic. I wanted to talk a little bit about, a lot of us have been involved in business continuity and disaster recovery planning, and it feels like we might be in a little bit of a live, you know, exercise of that, or a mix between that and Cory Doctorow's when sysadmins ruled the earth. But I think we'll have to make that a future topic. And I just wanted to thank everybody. I think it was great, you know, the content we covered, and I thank everybody for being so open. I think there's a lot of curiosity, and we're going to continue to take ideas, and I would encourage everyone in the community to just think about how we can do this kind of outreach, which I think is great, to help people understand what's going on at the infrastructure layer. So with that, we're just at time, and so again, thank all the panelists.
Thank you, Avi.
Yep. And yep.
Thanks, Avi.
Thanks for
Michelle? Yep.
Thank you to the panelists and to our audience. If there are additional questions or you'd like more information, you can reach us at info@kentik.com and keep an eye out for an email from the Kentik team where you will get a recorded version of today's presentation. Thanks again and have a nice day, everyone.